Dan Mandis here, and want to welcome on into the radio program Dakota Wood from the Heritage Foundation, a foreign policy analyst, and always love, Dakota, having you on the radio program. So the president, there's so much that has happened over the past 24 hours. The president, as you know, now in Tel Aviv. Over the evening time, overnight, we had Iran telling Israel that time had run out. And we've been talking about this hospital that was bombed. Originally, everybody thought that it was Israel because the media took the word of Hamas. But now it looks like it was actually this offshoot of Hamas, the Islamic Jihad. Now, let's start with the hospital, if we could, Dakota, because we've got, from what Israel has put out, they've got radar tracks. They've got this intercepted phone call that clearly shows that the guys over there at Hamas, the terrorists at Hamas, they've realized that there's been a screw up and the missile failed and landed on this hospital and it blew up and got 500 or so people killed. Is the evidence overwhelming, Dakota, that this was not Israel that blew up this hospital?
Yeah, the documented evidence absolutely puts Israel in the clear. I mean, all the things you just mentioned, they're tracking their own airplanes. They know where an aircraft is at in the airspace and what attack run it's on. All that is documented by radar and by flight recorder data and all that stuff. Then you also have incoming rockets and missiles, whether it's from Gaza or southern Lebanon, fired by Hezbollah, or even from Syria. So all of this Iron Dome that we've heard so much about, this missile defense system, all of those radars are involved tracking things that are coming in. So in terms of radar tracks and signatures and trajectories, Israel has all that information. The question is, do we believe Israel? If you're in the Arab world or you're a propagandist for Hamas or you're down in Egypt, are you going to take Israel's word and not Hamas's? On the Hamas side, the rockets and the missiles that they use are notoriously inaccurate. So on the Iron Dome, the missile defense, it will track an incoming rocket. And if it's going to land harmlessly in the desert or something like that, then it doesn't engage. It's only when it's inbound for a population center or a key target. So when Hamas is firing these rockets, sometimes they're assembled in someone's basement or a parking garage. Sometimes they're shipped in ready-made, already manufactured by Iran. And so the accuracy of these things are pretty bad. And they can fire one, and it just goes fluey. I mean, it's just an errant shot, and it lands someplace where you didn't want it to. And all the data says that it was one of those errant rockets aimed at Israel that went off course and struck this hospital.
I got to tell you, it's interesting because you picked up on something that I have been mentioning, which is, okay, so we understand and accept that this was not Israel, but overnight, and I know that you know this, but we have protests in Turkey, in Iran, in Jordan, in some places. Embassies are being swarmed, or flags are being burned. Embassies are being burned as well. I mean, there really is no way to convince the Arab world that this was not Israel. Is there a way to convince them?
No, it's a mob mentality. I mean, that list of countries, Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Qatar, Iran, Spain, Egypt, Yemen. I mean, we even have our own U.S. Representative Tlaib, who the smoke hadn't even cleared from the hospital, and she was, on social media, a U.S. congressional representative blaming Israel before the facts were even known. So when you get into a mob mentality, passions, run. The people who want that mob to become violent, they foment that, they feed into it, and it's really, really hard to roll that back. I mean, one of the best expressions I've read in the last 12 hours or so is things are rapidly spiraling out of control. And you just get, again, I keep coming back to this mob mentality. People are getting really ginned up on this thing, and they're protesting, and it feeds on itself, and it's really hard to get that back in the box.
Dakota, I've got to ask you, President Biden is in Israel. Iran is, I don't know if you'd call it saber rattling, but Iran is saying time's up, and they're threatening to bomb Israel as our president is there. Do you think they are saber rattling, or do you believe that our president is actually in some real danger?
I don't think so, because that would bring the U.S. directly into the war. The murder, the assassination, killing of the U.S. president. The U.S. would have no choice to do that. Now, if you're a 12er in Shia Islam and you believe that the 12th Imam has been in hiding for many centuries, and it's going to take an apocalyptic event to bring that person back to save the world for Allah, then you do have this sect within Shiism that looks for these problems. So you could make the case that by killing the president or fomenting this incredibly broadening war in Israel creates the conditions for Shiism to become then dominant over Sunniism or any other religious belief. So there is speculative, a case to be made for that. But I think that Iran is going to hold itself back. It is afraid of an Israeli strike against its nuclear facilities. Israel certainly has the ability to do that. But where Iran can really win, if their agenda is the elimination of Israel, is just to continue to prompt Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Islamic State still exists, and other terrorist entities there in Syria, to just start pummeling Israel. I mean, Hezbollah itself in southern Lebanon has in the neighborhood of 200,000 rockets and missiles. I mean, salvo density, you could just overwhelm Iron Dome and any other missile defense system that's in the area. So you combine that with several tens of thousands that Hamas still has out of Gaza, and rockets that can be fired from the West Bank adjacent there to Jerusalem, and it could be a very, very ugly time. The question is, what then brings the U.S. into the war? Does that broaden it? Does Lebanon get involved, in Syria, in Egypt? Saudi Arabia has called off the effort to normalize relations with Israel. So you can see how this thing can just rapidly expand in a very dramatic, quick fashion. And all the calls for restraint are well-intended. I just don't know that the passions are going to be cooled sufficiently in the coming days.
Dakota Wood with the Heritage Foundation is joining us. Dakota, did you happen to hear Joe Biden's opening salvo when he sat down to address Benjamin Netanyahu?
I didn't watch the news conference at all, but I've read about some of his comments. He was talking about the other team responsible, as if this is some kind of a replay of his football days or something like that. We've got Israel's back. He uses that in all of his statements, but there might be something specific that you want to key on here.
So it sounded to me, well, first of all, you read it, so you didn't have the opportunity to hear Joe Biden, but it was classic Biden, classic tired Biden. He went off script. He got lost in the middle of a story, and he did call Hamas the other team. People are aghast at that. But one of the things that he said is a few things. He said a few times, the world is watching, and he talked about, how the Gaza is full of, innocent Palestinians and it felt like he was sort of teeing up Benjamin Netanyahu to not send the 400,000 ground troops into Gaza. It sounded like, originally people have been saying that, we got to give Israel wide berth to let them do what they need to do to rid the world of Hamas. But now it seems like Joe is sort of tiptoeing that back when he says things like the world is watching, the innocent people in Gaza, and so forth.
It's always Israel that has to exercise restraint. I mean, that's the message that comes out of every capital, why Hezbollah and Hamas and Al-Qaeda and every other jihadi out there seems to be able to do whatever they want. I mean, they horrify us, but let's not do anything to make the problem worse. It's like Chamberlain saying, hey, I've got to deal with Herr Hitler. After Hitler has annexed Sudetenland and gone into Poland and other locations there in Europe. So there is this abject fear of the war escalating and what the consequences to that would be. I mean, it would really, really be bad. And so, the president is trying to play both sides of this. We unfalteringly have Israel's back, but don't do anything too extreme that might broaden this war. Well, Israel cannot tolerate Hamas existing as an entity that threatens the security of that country and the lives of its citizens. They just can't tolerate it. It would also invite Hezbollah and others to continue attacking. And what's Israel supposed to do? So, the president did mention kind of the equivalency of on a population basis that 1,300, 1,400 Israelis killed is the equivalent to 40,000 or 50,000 Americans on a population basis. So can you imagine the U.S., showing restraint in the wake of 9/11, that George W. Bush would have gotten up on the rubble of the World Trade Center with a megaphone and said, I know we just lost nearly 3,000 of our fellow citizens, but let's exercise restraint before we go marching off to war against al-Qaeda.
Exactly.
I mean, the public wouldn't have tolerated that. So, Hamas and Iran in particular has created this situation. Israel has to respond. Their hesitancy or delay going into Gaza is because they're piecing together exactly what it is they're trying to do. So, yes, they've got a mobilized population, but urban warfare, urban combat is the most brutal, casualty-producing, difficult form of combat that you can possibly imagine. Streets are rubbled. It's hard to get armored vehicles in there. Every hidey hole is an ambush spot. The place has been strewn with all kinds of booby traps. I mean, it's just a very ugly situation, and you would want to try to rescue the hostages, not just recover bodies. So Netanyahu and his commanders are trying to figure out how best to deal with this. And then we've got old Biden coming in, doesn't really project, confidence and strength and vigor and assuredness. So I don't know if this trip of his to Israel was a wise idea or not, but you can bet that the White House is going to use this as a campaign ad, showing the president going into a war zone and how courageous was that. So there's politics strewn throughout this thing. I'm still with Israel, obviously, and they need to do what they need to do to protect their country and citizens.
Well, Dakota, if you do nothing else today, go find the actual video of Joe Biden, and so you can hear the weakness of Joe Biden on the world stage. And I very much appreciate you joining us here on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7. Great analysis, great perspective from Dakota Wood from the Heritage Foundation. It's 6:51.